October 1943. A café in occupied Paris. An SS officer sits reviewing documents over coffee. A waiter approaches with the check and a pen for signature. The officer takes the pen. He presses down to sign his name. He feels a sharp prick on his thumb. Nothing more than a pinprick, really. He hands back the pen, annoyed. Within 6 hours, he's dead. The autopsy finds nothing. No gunshot. No knife wound. No poison in his stomach. Just a tiny puncture mark on his thumb that the medical examiner almost misses. The waiter is 3 blocks away before the officer even leaves the cafe. The murder weapon is tucked in his coat pocket, looking exactly like what it is, a fountain pen. The weapon that killed him was perhaps the most elegant assassination tool ever created. Not elegant in appearance, it was deliberately ordinary, a standard fountain pen indistinguishable from millions of others. Elegant in concept, a writing instrument that wrote, a poison delivery system that killed, a weapon so subtle that victims often didn't realize they'd been attacked until symptoms began hours later. This was the pen gun, the poison pen, the weapon that let OSS agents kill in plain sight, in crowds, in broad daylight, with a tool so mundane that carrying it aroused zero suspicion. When the Germans finally captured one and analyzed it, their intelligence report contained a single word: diabolical. By 1942, the Office of Strategic Services faced a fundamental problem with covert assassination. The OSS, America's wartime intelligence service and predecessor to the CIA, needed to eliminate high-value targets in occupied Europe: collaborators, Gestapo officers, intelligence agents, Nazi officials. But traditional assassination methods were catastrophically risky in enemy-controlled territory. Firearms were impossible. Gunshots attracted immediate attention. Silenced weapons like the British well rod were effective, but still produced noise and required the assassin to be within arm's reach at the moment of firing. More critically, carrying any firearm in occupied Europe meant instant execution if discovered. German patrols conducted random searches. Checkpoints were ubiquitous. An OSS agent caught with a pistol, even a small one, would be tortured for intelligence and then hanged. Knives presented similar problems. They required close physical contact. They left obvious wounds. They produced blood evidence. Most importantly, they required combat skills most intelligence operatives didn't possess. The OSS recruited linguists, analysts, radio operators, and saboteurs, not knife fighters. A botched knife attack meant hand-to-hand combat with trained German soldiers. That was a fight most operatives would lose. Poison seemed like the solution, but conventional poisoning had fatal flaws. Introducing poison into food or drink required access to the target's meals and time alone with them. It left traceable evidence. Forensic analysis could detect most common poisons. Worse, it was unreliable. The target might not consume enough poison. They might survive with medical treatment. They might share the poisoned food with others, killing the wrong people and triggering massive investigations. What the OSS needed seemed impossible. A weapon that was completely undetectable when carried, required zero special training to use, could be deployed in seconds in public spaces, killed reliably with a single application, left minimal forensic evidence, and, ideally, worked so subtly that the target wouldn't even realize they'd been attacked until it was too late to identify their assassin. The specification was absurd: a poison delivery system disguised as an everyday object that agents could carry through checkpoints without suspicion. A mechanism so simple that a linguist with no weapons training could use it effectively. A dose calibrated precisely, strong enough to kill reliably, but contained in a volume small enough to conceal in a pen body. The lethal agent had to act quickly enough to prevent medical intervention, but slowly enough that the operative could escape before symptoms appeared. And it all had to fit in something that looked, felt, and functioned exactly like an ordinary fountain pen, because any deviation would compromise the disguise. Engineers at the OSS Research and Development Branch faced what seemed like an impossible balancing act between lethality, concealability, and operational simplicity. The solution came from Building 15 at the Congressional Country Club in Bethesda, Maryland, a commandeered facility that served as the OSS Technical Services headquarters. The team responsible called themselves the Pens and Pencils Section, a deliberately bland name for a unit developing some of the deadliest close-quarters weapons of the war. The core insight was counterintuitive. Don't try to make the pen shoot anything. Don't use a trigger mechanism. Don't require precise aim. Instead, make it a spring-loaded hypodermic needle concealed in a functional writing instrument. The operative would press the pen clip, the metal clasp that normally hooks onto a pocket, and a needle would spring out from the pen's body. A quick jab would inject the poison. Release the clip. The needle retracts. The entire attack takes less than 2 seconds. The engineering challenges were substantial. First, the needle mechanism. The needle had to be strong enough to penetrate clothing and skin with a simple jabbing motion. It had to deploy instantly when the clip was pressed, but remain completely hidden when not activated. The mechanism required a powerful spring, a reliable release mechanism, and a retraction system, all while maintaining the pen's external appearance as an ordinary fountain pen. The team started with Parker 51 fountain pens, one of the most common writing instruments of the era. Millions were in circulation. German soldiers carried them. French civilians used them. An OSS agent holding a Parker 51 was as unremarkable as someone wearing a wristwatch. The pen's internal space provided just enough room for modification. Inside the pen body, engineers installed a hollow needle approximately 1 inch long, positioned along the pen's axis. The needle was surgical-grade stainless steel, sharpened to pierce fabric and skin with minimal force. At rest, the needle sat fully retracted inside the pen body, invisible from the outside. The spring mechanism used watch spring technology, coiled steel under tension, released by pressing the pen clip inward. When the operative pressed the clip, a mechanical linkage released the spring. The needle shot forward through a tiny hole drilled in the pen's barrel, extending approximately half an inch beyond the pen's surface. The deployment was instantaneous. Spring force drove the needle out in less than 1/10 of a second. Fast enough that the target often didn't realize they'd been struck until the operative had already stepped away. The needle itself was hollow, a hypodermic design. Inside the needle cavity sat a tiny reservoir containing the lethal agent. When the needle penetrated skin, a secondary mechanism injected the poison directly into the tissue. The injection was mechanical, triggered by the impact of needle penetration. No manual plunger required. No additional button to press. Jab, inject, retract. The entire sequence was automatic. Retracting the needle required manually pushing the clip back to its original position, which recompressed the spring and drew the needle back inside the pen body. This took deliberate effort, enough that accidental discharge was nearly impossible, but simple enough that an operative could reload in seconds. The pen could be used multiple times before requiring complete refilling. The poison selection was equally calculated. The OSS evaluated dozens of candidates: cyanide, ricin, strychnine, various nerve agents, and exotic botanical toxins. The winner was a substance whose exact formula remains partially classified to this day, referenced in declassified documents only as Compound X, or Agent K. What we know from period reports is revealing. Compound X had specific properties optimized for this delivery method. First, rapid absorption through tissue. Unlike ingested poisons that required digestion, Compound X entered the bloodstream immediately upon injection. Second, delayed symptom onset. The target would feel the pinprick but experience no immediate effects. Symptoms appeared 2 to 6 hours later, giving the operative ample time to establish an alibi far from the scene. Third, symptoms that mimicked natural causes, initially appearing as heart attack or stroke. By the time medical personnel recognized poisoning, forensic evidence was difficult to establish. Fourth, lethality at extremely small doses. The entire reservoir in the pen held less than 0.2 milliliters, a single drop. That quantity was sufficient to kill an adult male with high reliability. The dose. Calculation was precise. Too little, and the target might survive with medical intervention. Too much was wasteful and increased the risk of accidental exposure to the operative. The engineers calibrated for the lethal dose median, the amount that would kill 50% of subjects. Then they doubled it. The pen carried enough poison to kill with 95% plus reliability based on animal testing. Safety mechanisms protected the operative. The poison reservoir was sealed with a rubber gasket and secured with a screw-on cap accessible only by disassembling the pen. Under normal handling, accidental exposure was virtually impossible. If the needle accidentally deployed without penetrating a target, the poison remained in the reservoir. Injection required pressure against tissue. The operative could carry the loaded pen in a pocket, drop it, even write with it normally, without danger. The final product was masterful in its simplicity. An operative received a pen that looked, felt, and wrote exactly like a standard Parker 51. To arm it, they pressed the clip. To attack, they jabbed any exposed skin, hand, neck, arm, with the pen's lower barrel. To disarm, they pushed the clip back. The weapon required no specialized training beyond a 5-minute demonstration. An analyst with no combat experience could use it as effectively as a trained commando. Production began in late 1942. Exact numbers remain classified, but estimates suggest 200 to 400 units were manufactured. Each pen was individually tested, serialized, and issued only to OSS operatives deploying into high-risk environments. The pens were never supplied to resistance groups or foreign agents. Too dangerous if captured, too valuable to risk compromise. The poison pen saw its first operational use in occupied France in early 1943. OSS operatives embedded with resistance networks received the pens as part of their standard equipment kit, alongside L-pills, silk maps, and forged identity papers. The pens were issued with specific instructions. Use only against high-value targets whose elimination justified the risk of compromise. Deployment protocols were strict. Operatives carried the pens in standard ways, clipped to a pocket, tucked in a briefcase, lying on a desk, never hidden, never treated as special. The whole point was normalization. A pen in a pocket aroused zero suspicion. A pen hidden in a secret compartment suggested something was wrong. The targeting philosophy emphasized opportunity over planning. Unlike firearm assassinations that required careful positioning and escape routes, the poison pen allowed for spontaneous attacks in circumstances that would be impossible with conventional weapons. A target walking through a crowd, standing at a train station, sitting in a restaurant. Any moment of proximity became a potential kill window. If you're finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. The most documented use, though details remain partially redacted, occurred in Paris in October 1943. An OSS operative working undercover as a French civilian received intelligence that a Gestapo officer responsible for infiltrating resistance cells would be dining at a specific restaurant. The operative couldn't bring a firearm. The restaurant was crowded with German personnel. A shooting would result in immediate capture and execution. The operative took a seat near the target's table. When the Gestapo officer requested a pen to sign his bill, the operative offered his Parker 51. The target took it, began to write, and pressed down firmly on the paper. The operative had positioned the pen so the needle would deploy against the target's thumb when pressure was applied. The target felt the prick, barely noticeable. He finished signing, returned the pen with an irritated comment about the cheap construction, and left the restaurant. The operative remained seated for another 20 minutes, finishing his meal normally, then departed through a different exit. The Gestapo officer collapsed 6 hours later while reviewing files at headquarters. Initial diagnosis: heart attack. The officer was 38 years old and in good health, which raised some suspicion, but the autopsy found no evidence of poisoning beyond a tiny puncture wound attributed to a splinter or insect bite. The case was closed as death by natural causes. The resistance cell remained operational. Other documented uses targeted collaborators in occupied territories. In Belgium, an OSS operative eliminated a Belgian national who had been feeding intelligence to the Abwehr, German military intelligence. The target was killed during a crowded public event where conventional assassination would have been impossible. In the Netherlands, a poison pen attack removed a Dutch police official who had been facilitating roundups of resistance members. In both cases, the attacks occurred in broad daylight, in public spaces, with the operative escaping without suspicion. The psychological effect of the weapon extended beyond its direct lethality. After several unexplained deaths of German intelligence officers and collaborators, paranoia spread through occupation forces. A captured OSS document found in German archives reveals that the Wehrmacht issued warnings about poisoned writing implements to troops in France. Some German officers began refusing to borrow pens from civilians or touch any writing instrument they hadn't personally secured. This level of anxiety, induced by a weapon that might not even be present, represented a psychological victory. The weapon's limitations shaped its deployment. The poison pen required physical proximity within arm's reach. It required a moment of distraction when the target wouldn't immediately notice the jab. And critically, it required that the operative have plausible reason to be near the target with a pen in hand. These constraints meant the weapon was most effective against targets who interacted with civilians in routine ways. Officers who ate in public restaurants, officials who conducted business in cafes, intelligence agents who met with informants in semi-public spaces. Field reports from OSS operatives reveal mixed feelings about the weapon. Some praised its effectiveness and subtlety. Others found the intimate nature of the attack psychologically difficult. You had to touch your target, jab them deliberately, then maintain composure while knowing you'd just delivered a fatal dose. The delayed action was both blessing and curse. It allowed escape, but it also meant operatives didn't receive immediate confirmation of success. They had to wait hours or days for intelligence reports to confirm the target had died. The poison pen represented a uniquely American approach to covert assassination, emphasizing technological innovation and operational simplicity over traditional tradecraft. British intelligence services, specifically SOE and MI6, pursued different solutions to the same problem. The British developed poison pills disguised as buttons, cufflinks, and hollow coins. They created poisoned umbrella tips, most famously used in the Cold War assassination of Georgy Markov. Their philosophy emphasized concealable delivery methods, but often required specialized training or specific deployment scenarios. The SOE's poison devices typically required the operative to introduce the poison into food or drink, or to scratch the target with a treated blade. These methods were effective but more complex operationally. The British well-rod silent pistol, discussed in other contexts, represented a different philosophy entirely, a purpose-built weapon that was obviously a weapon if discovered. The poison pen occupied the opposite end of the spectrum, a weapon that was indistinguishable from a common object until the moment of use. German intelligence services never developed an equivalent weapon. The Abwehr and later the SD focused on traditional assassination methods, firearms, explosives, and specialized personnel. German operational doctrine emphasized trained assassins rather than technological solutions. When German forces captured an OSS poison pen in late 1944, their technical analysis report expressed genuine alarm at the device's sophistication. The report noted that the weapon could defeat all standard search procedures because it appeared completely innocent. Soviet intelligence services developed similar technology, but with a different approach. The NKVD created poison delivery systems disguised as walking sticks, cigarette cases, and even rings with spring-loaded needles in the 1930s. However, Soviet designs typically used more exotic poisons, ricin,
radioactive compounds, and were less focused on mimicking common objects. The Soviet philosophy emphasized fear and deterrence. The American philosophy emphasized deniability and subtlety. The comparison reveals strategic thinking. American intelligence needed weapons that American civilians, who were not trained,
spies, could use effectively after minimal instruction. Many OSS operatives were academics, businessmen, and professionals recruited for their language skills or regional knowledge, not combat abilities. The poison pen was designed for smart amateurs, simple to use, impossible to mess up, effective without training. Specification comparison: OSS poison pen, 5.5 inches long, weight 0.8 ounces, needle length 1 inch, injection volume 0.2 ml, lethal dose single jab, symptoms 2 to 6 hours, estimated 200 to 400 units produced. SOE poison devices, various forms, buttons, coins, blades, required introduction into food, jawed drink, or deep scratching, symptoms immediate to 1 hour, less deniable. German assassination equipment, traditional firearms, knives, explosives, trained personnel required, no equivalent covert injection systems documented. Soviet NKVD injection devices, walking sticks, rings, various disguises, typically used more toxic, exotic poisons, designed for state terror as much as elimination. The poison pen occupied a unique operational niche. It was the only weapon that could be carried openly through German checkpoints, deployed in crowded spaces, and withdrawn without anyone realizing an attack had occurred. That combination of features made it irreplaceable for specific missions where traditional assassination was impossible. The poison pen was not perfect. Its limitations were significant and shaped operational doctrine throughout its use. First, the proximity problem. The operative had to be within arm's reach to deploy the weapon. Unlike firearms with range or explosives with blast radius, the poison pen required you to physically touch your target. This meant the operative needed a cover reason to approach, posing as a waiter, pretending to ask for directions, offering the pen as a helpful gesture. If the target was suspicious or isolated behind security, the weapon was useless. Second, limited payload. The pen held enough poison for a single dose. If the needle failed to penetrate deeply enough, striking heavy clothing or hitting at a poor angle, the injection might be incomplete. The operative would have no immediate way to know if a lethal dose had been delivered. This uncertainty plagued several operations where targets survived with symptoms, but not death, triggering investigations. Third, the weapon required specific conditions for effectiveness. The target needed exposed skin or thin clothing. They needed to be distracted or trusting enough not to react immediately to the prick. They needed to be away from immediate medical care. A target who collapsed in a hospital had a chance of survival with aggressive treatment. These factors made timing and location critical. Fourth, the poison itself had limitations. Compound X was calibrated for average adult males. Targets who were particularly large or in exceptional physical condition might survive the standard dose. The delayed symptom onset, while operationally useful, meant that if German intelligence recognized a pattern of poisonings, they could potentially administer countermeasures within the symptom window. Fortunately for the OSS, this never occurred. The deaths appeared sporadic and unconnected. Fifth, psychological burden. Multiple OSS operatives reported difficulty with the intimate nature of poison pen attacks. Unlike shooting someone from across a street, using the poison pen required deliberate personal contact. You had to look at your target, move close enough to touch them, feel the needle penetrate their skin, then maintain composure while knowing you'd just killed them. Some operatives requested reassignment after successful missions because they couldn't psychologically handle repeated uses. Sixth, captured equipment risk. If a poison pen was captured with the operative, it provided physical evidence of assassination intent. Unlike a firearm that might be explained as self-defense, a poison-loaded hypodermic pen had only one purpose.
OSS protocol required operatives to destroy the pen if capture was imminent, breaking it open and exposing the poison reservoir to air, rendering it useless as evidence but potentially exposing the operative to lethal contamination. Despite these limitations, the operational record was remarkably successful. Declassified OSS documents reference approximately 12 confirmed kills using poison pens between 1943 and 1945, with additional suspected uses that remain unconfirmed. No OSS operative was captured with a poison pen intact. No German counterintelligence successfully identified and stopped a poison pen attack in progress. The weapon's operational security remained uncompromised throughout the war. The legacy proved enduring. The OSS dissolved in 1945, but its technical services transferred to the CIA when that organization formed in 1947. The poison pen concept evolved into Cold War assassination devices, including the famous Bulgarian umbrella that killed Georgy Markov in 1978, a spring-loaded ricin pellet fired from an umbrella tip, direct descendant of the OSS poison pen philosophy. Modern intelligence services continue to develop similar technology. Details remain classified, but occasional leaks and defector testimony reference pen guns, lipstick pistols, and other everyday object weapons used by various intelligence agencies. The core insight that the best weapon for covert operations is one that doesn't look like a weapon remains valid. Original OSS poison pens are extremely rare. The few surviving examples are held in classified CIA archives or specialized intelligence museums with restricted access. No complete, functional unit is available for public examination. The weapon remains classified in terms of specific technical details, particularly the poison formula. Compound X's exact composition is still redacted in declassified documents, suggesting it remains relevant to modern intelligence operations or represents a baseline for evaluating current.
Assassination technologies. The strategic lesson endured beyond the hardware. Sometimes the most effective weapon is the one your enemy never sees. Sometimes the best cover is no cover at all, just an object so ordinary that carrying it raises zero suspicion. Sometimes the most sophisticated technology is the technology that appears simple. A fountain pen that writes, that's all it is, until the moment it becomes something else. October 1943, a café in occupied Paris. An SS officer signs his check with a borrowed pen. He feels a pinprick on his thumb. 6 hours later, he's dead. The autopsy finds nothing. The waiter who handed him the pen is already across the city. The murder weapon sits in his coat pocket, looking exactly like what it is, a Parker 51 fountain pen. Unremarkable, ordinary, lethal. The poison pen represented American innovation at its most elegant. A weapon that killed without looking like a weapon. A tool that required no training yet worked flawlessly. A device so subtle that German intelligence never developed effective countermeasures. 1.2 inches of surgical steel. 0.2 milliliters of compound X. A spring mechanism that deployed in 1/10 of a second. That was all you needed to eliminate a target in broad daylight, in a crowd, with no one noticing until hours after you'd vanished. The Germans called it diabolical. The OSS called it effective. History calls it one of the most successful covert weapons of World War II. Not because it killed hundreds, it didn't, but because every time an OSS operative walked through a German checkpoint with a pen in their pocket, carrying a weapon so deadly and so perfectly disguised that the enemy couldn't conceive of its existence, that was operational superiority. That was American engineering. That was how you fight a war in the shadows, with a pen that writes and kills, and leaves no trace except a body and a tiny puncture mark that looks like nothing at all.